Broadcasting to you from somewhere deep in the heart of Texas. Once again, it's me, Annie Ann. Hi. Hope everybody's doing well today. All right, so today I'm going to pick up on Job 31:16 through 40. So 16 says, if I have kept the poor from their desire, or caused the eyes of the widow to fail, or eaten my morsel by myself, so that the fatherless could not eat of it. But from my youth I reared him as a father, and from my mother's womb I guided the widow. If I have seen anyone perish for lack of clothing, or any poor man without covering. Okay, just one second. Give me just a second. Okay, I had to shut the window. It was too loud. Okay. So if I have raised my hand against the fatherless when I saw I had help in the gate, then let my arm fall from my shoulder, and let my arm be torn from the socket. For the destruction from God is a terror to me. Because of his magnificence, I cannot endure. And if I have made gold my hope, or said to find gold, you are my confidence, or if I have rejoiced because my wealth was great, and because my hand had gained much, or if I have observed the sun when it shines, or the moon moving in brightness, so that my heart has been secretly enticed, and my mouth has kissed my hand, this also would be an iniquity deserving of judgment, for I would have denied God who is above. And if I have rejoiced at the destruction of him who hated me, or lifted myself up when evil found him, indeed I have not allowed my mouth to sin by asking for a curse on his soul. And I'm on verse 31. So if the men of my tent have not said, who is there that has not been satisfied with his meat? But no sojourner had to lodge in the street, for I have opened my doors to the traveler. And if I have covered my transgressions as Adam by hiding my iniquity in my bosom, because I feared the great multitude and dreaded the concept of families, so that I kept silence and didn't go out of the door. 35. Oh, that I had one to hear me, hear my mark. Oh, that the Almighty would answer me, that my prosecutor had written a book. Surely I would carry it on my shoulder and bind it on me like a crown. 37. I would declare to him the number of my steps. Like a prince, I would approach him. If my land cries out against me, and its furrows weep together, and if I have eaten its fruit without money, or caused its owners to lose their lives, then let thistles grow instead of wheat, and weeds instead of barley. The words of Job are ended. So, there was a young man who was applying, at a prestigious Philadelphia firm, and being interviewed, by the senior partner. The young man, he heard this comment, our firm, as you're aware, has been in existence for many years, and we pride ourselves in being highly thought of, not only in this city, but throughout this country. So to maintain this reputation, we value the integrity of our associates, you know, as it has such great impact on our successful standing in the legal arena. So I know that, you're young, but can you give me an example of integrity that has had an influence on someone else? And the young man said silently for a few seconds, and he smiled and responded, well, sir, as you know, college and law school education is quite expensive. And I took out loans and had to borrow a significant amount of money from my dad. And he had to second mortgage his house. in order to provide me with the necessary funds to complete my education. Well, after my first court case as an attorney, I paid back all the money my dad had lent me. The interviewer thought about what the young man said, and he came to an acknowledgement of it being an acceptable answer and remarked, "Well, yes, I can see your integrity in doing immediately what was right and proper to do. You forsook thinking of yourself and made proper amends to the one who took care of you all your life and helped you fulfill your dreams in being a lawyer." And the young man smiled proudly as he, could see his answer pleased this influential law firm chief executive. But he was informed that an answer regarding his acceptance and salary package would be forthcoming in the next couple of days. So as the two men stood and shook hands to the end of the interview, the older man considered one more question for the young man. He said, "I am a little curious about your successful case that you just spoke about. I'm quite familiar in keeping up with all the cases that go, on in our city, and I somehow can't remember the case you just referenced." So what was the case name? The young man, who was ecstatic about receiving a job offer, was now somewhat hesitant to answer. And the older lawyer waited, for the reply to his question. And finally, the young man replied, "Well, sir, this is the case where my father took me to court to get back the money he had lent me." What do you think about that, Shimmy? Huh? What do you think about that, Shim Shim? Huh? What do you think about that? So, leave it to lawyers to spin something towards their best interest, right? So integrity, it's the basic fundamental quality of being honest and having strong moral principles, moral uprightness. And it's generally a personal choice to hold oneself to consistent moral and ethical standards. So, in ethics, integrity is regarded by many people as the honesty and truthfulness, or accuracy of one's actions. And integrity, it can stand in opposition to hypocrisy. And the judging, with the standards of integrity involves regarding internal consistency as a virtue and suggests that, parties holding within themselves apparently conflicting values should, account for this discrepancy or alter their beliefs. So the word integrity, evolved from the Latin adjective integer, meaning whole or complete, right? So in this context, integrity is the inner sense of wholeness, deriving from qualities such as honesty and consistency of character. And as such, one may judge that others have integrity, to the extent that they act according to the values, beliefs, and principles that they claim to hold. So, significant attention is given to the subject of integrity in law. And, the conception of law in the 20th century, philosophy of law, you know, and jurisprudence centering in the part of the research of Ronald Dworkin as studied in his book, Law's Empire. Dworkin's position on integrity in law reinforces the conception of justice viewed as fairness. So one thing Job held, he held on to and wouldn't give in to, be that, he maintained his integrity. So Job respected all others no matter what their status in life was. And he was discussed in verses 16 through 23, how he was upright in all his dealings with them. And, other thoughts Job considered, are brought to light in verses 23 and 24. Here he justly claims that, he never had to put any confidence to his worldly wealth. Excuse me. So he realized that wealth to others, could be a form of idolatry. So he looked at this possibility in verses 26 through 28 and could accurately admit that he never allowed this in his life. Wealth and power, can give someone the tools to exact revenge on those who did him any harm. But Job readily admitted that he never in his lifetime fell to a sin, which he tells us in verses 29 to 31. In fact, he knew and explained in verse 23 that he never isolated himself from the poor and needy, and he was always ready to help others. If he saw some stranger, in need, he would never neglect to help any poor stranger. And we hear the word today much used, out of alignment is the word transparency. Job readily admits in verses 33 and 34, that his life was an open book, and that he himself never, that he never even thought of any hypocrisy in concealing his own sins or cowardice, and conniving in regard to sins of others. And in verses 35 to 37, Job's thoughts, instead of self-reflection, appeals to God's judgment concerning his integrity. Because when people, have reached more wealth than they can ever spend, they seek out power. And this power is used ultimately toward the oppression and the violent invasion of other people's rights. And Job, he describes in verses 38 through 40, this is one thing he never even dabbled with. So, in verse 16, excuse me a second. Excuse me. So in verse 16, if I kept the poor from their desire or caused the eyes of the widow to fail. Back in chapter 22, Eliphaz had changed Job with being, he charged Job with being cruel and heartless to the poor. Thou hast withholden bread from the hungry, stripped the naked of their clothing, and sent widows away empty. One would think he would not have been so very positive and expressive, in his charge, unless there had been some truth in it, some ground for it. And yet it appears by Job's protestation, that it was utterly false and groundless. He was never guilty of any such thing. Even though he's had extreme suffering, Job clings to his integrity. And he solemnly protests that he had never withheld from doing good to all people in need. And there was occasion, to the utmost of his ability. He was always compassionate to the poor and careful of them, especially the widows and fatherless. That was, destitute for help. Those people, the ones that were in need of help, they were destitute. And he was always ready to grant their desires and answer their expectations. If a poor person begged a kindness of his, he was ready to respond graciously to him or her. And if he could, understand by perceiving a widow's, desperate need and was too ashamed of asking for his help, he had compassion enough to give it and never caused the eyes of the widow to fail. So 17 says, or eaten my morsel by myself, so that the fatherless could not eat of it. So he placed a respect upon the poor and did them honor. And he took the fatherless children to eat with him at his own table. They should fare as he fared and be familiar with him. He would show himself, pleased with their company as if they had been his own. And 18 says, but from my youth I reared him as a father, and from my mother's womb I guided the widow. So, not that long ago, neighbors, would look out for each other's children. And I remember, when I was just driving at like age 16, my mom came out quite upset by the way I was driving. And before I could give the answer, she told me that someone down the block spotted me going through a stop sign without stopping. And I couldn't defend myself. The person was right and responsible enough of not being, a snitch, but was, acting in a parental way. So, in like manner, Job, he was very tender of other parents' children and had a fatherly concern for them. And he was a father to the fatherless, and he took care of orphans and brought them up with him under his own eye and gave them not only their daily substances, but also saw to their education. And he was a guide to the widow. He took the time to check up on them and give aid when necessary. And this Job says he did, from his youth, from his mother's womb, he had something of tenderness and compassion woven in his nature. You know, he began to do good ever since he could remember. And he had always some poor widow or fatherless child under his care. And his parents taught him, to pity him and relieve the poor and care for orphans. And he provided food, you know, convenient for them. And they ate of the same food that he did. And they did not eat after him or the crumbs that fell from his table, but with him, or the best dish upon the table. So, 19 says, if I had seen anyone perish for lack of clothing or any poor man without covering, if his heart had not blessed me, and if he was not warmed with the fleece of my sheep, he took particular care to clothe those that were without covering, which, would be more expensive to him than feeding them. If Job knew of any person that was in this type of distress, he immediately responded with the proper care. And he had good, warm, strong clothes made on purpose for them, of the fleece of his own sheep. So basically, when they put these clothes on, they thought about him and they commended his charity and blessed God for him and prayed to God to bless him. Job's sheep were burned with fire from heaven. Job's sheep were burned with fire from heaven. But this was his comfort, that when he had them, he came honestly by them and used them charitably, fed the poor with their flesh, and clothed them with their wool. He says, if I had raised my hand against the fatherless when I saw I had help in the gate, then let my arm fall from my shoulder and let my arm be torn from the socket. So he had never been accessory to the wronging of any that were poor. Like our amazing holy God, who is not a respecter of persons. Job was tender to all and injurious to none. He never so much as lifted up a hand against the fatherless, never threatened or frightened them, or offered to strike them. He never used his power to crush those who stood in his way, or squeeze what he had out of them, though he saw his help in the gate, and that is, though he had support enough, both in the people and the judges, and both to enable him to do it. So with the vow, he asked that, condemnation be upon himself if he had ever caused this horrible treatment of anyone. If I've been oppressive to the poor, let my arm fall from my shoulder blade, and my arm be broken from the bone. That is, let my flesh rot off from the bone, and one bone be disjointed and broken off from another. So 23 says, for destruction from God is a terror to me, and because of his magnificence, I cannot endure. Those who oppress the poor and pervert judgment and justice forget that God, who is supremely higher than anything in existence and therefore is higher than they, who is able to deal with them for their evil treatment. Job considered this all the time. Job knew that God is the patron of oppressed poverty and will not let oppressors go unpunished. Job was aware that God would certainly be against him if he should wrong the poor. 24 says, if I have made gold my hope, or said to find gold, you are my confidence. If I have rejoiced because my wealth was great, and because my hand had gained much. So even though he was the richest person in the world, Job protests that he never set his heart upon the wealth of the world, nor took the things of it for his portions and happiness. He had gold and he had fine gold. His wealth was great and he had gotten much. Our wealth is either an advantage or a great problem to us according as we stand affected by it. So if we make it our rest and our ruin, it'll be our ruin, you see. and we make it our servant and an instrument of righteousness, it will be a blessing to us. So Job put no great confidence in it, and he did not make gold his hope. Hey, Roots. Good to see you. Yeah, my cat does love me a lot. It goes to tell you what kind of person I am. The animals tell you. Yeah. So, Job, he didn't think that his might and the power of his hand, obtained all his wealth. He took no pleasure in it in comparison with the spiritual things, which were the delight of his soul. And his joy didn't terminate in the gift, but passed through it to the giver. So if I've observed the sun when it shines, or the moon moving in brightness, so that my heart has been secretly enticed and my mouth has kissed my hand, this also would be an iniquity, deserving of judgment, for I would have denied God who is above. So the lust for money, that falls under the category of idol worship. So we see that after expressing his purity in material blessings, Job thinks about idol worship. And although never having been charged as an idol worshiper, Job defends his faith in this area also. And as you know, many of Job's fellow men worship the stars and sun against, spiritual as well as corporal adultery. Job made a covenant that whenever he looked at the lights of heaven, he should by faith look through them and beyond them to the Father of lights. He kept his heart with all diligence, that it should not be secretly enticed to think that there's a divine glory in their brightness or a divine power in their influence, and that therefore divine honors are to be paid to them. So here, is the source of idolatry. It begins in the heart. Every man is tempted to that, as to other sins, when he is drawn away from his own lust and enticed. So he did not so much as put a gesture upon these pretended deities. He did not perform the least and lowest act of adoration. His mouth did not kiss his hand, which was an old-fashioned act of civil respect, and making a bow, a bow to kiss the hand, and making a bow to kiss the hand, a form which it seems was anciently used in giving divine honors to the sun and moon. They could not reach to kiss the sun and stars, but to show their goodwill, they kissed their hand, you know, and that was reverencing those as their masters, which God has made servants to this lower world. Now, Job, he never did it. He looked upon it as a much greater, affront to the God of heaven, and no less than high treason against his crown and dignity. So 29 says, if I have rejoiced at the destruction of him who hated me, or lifted myself up when evil found him, indeed I have not allowed my mouth to sin by asking for a curse on his soul. So here's an important way that should govern our lives. In fact, our precious Holy Spirit instructs us in the book of Proverbs 24, verse 17. It says, do not rejoice when your enemy falls, and do not let your heart be glad when he stumbles. Job was far from revenge. He did not return the injuries that were done to him by others. He did not rejoice when any judgment hit his enemies, and he never wished a curse to his soul. That is, he was careful not to offend with his tongue by praying that his enemies be destroyed. Yeah. So if the men of my tent have not said, who is there that has not been satisfied with his meat? I'd have drink. So 32 says, but no sojourner had to lodge in the street, for I have opened my doors to the traveler. One thing that bothers me a lot is unappreciative people. You do and do for them, and when you might ask a small favor, they act like you never did anything for them. And sadly, I stick to the policy, Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Now, Job, on the other hand, informs us that when his employees saw an unappreciative, and complaining person, they would want to deal with that person. He, however, would just overlook the insult and be on the lookout to help out travelers or anyone else in need of food and shelter, not expecting any type of thanks. What a good man he was. And 33 says, if I have covered my transgressions as Adam by hiding my iniquity in my bosom, because I feared the great multitude, dreaded the contempt of families, so that I kept silence and did not go out the door. So we have here Job's defense against three more accusations. The general crime of which his friends accused him was that under the cloak of a profession of religion, he had kept up secret sins, and that really he was as bad as other wicked people, but had the art of concealing it. Zophar insinuated back in chapter 20 that he hid his iniquity under his tongue. No, says Job, I never did. I never covered my transgression as Adam, never diminished a sin with frivolous excuses, nor made fig leaves the shelter of my shame, nor ever hid my iniquity in my bosom. It is natural to us to cover our sins. We have it from our first parents. We are slow to confess our faults, willing to extenuate them, and make the best of ourselves, to pass the blame upon others, as Adam on his wife. Job was being charged with being a coward due to fear of others finding out about his sins. To counter this charge, Job produces as an evidence of his sincerity and it not allowing anyone or anything to hold him back from the confession of sins. Did I fear a great multitude that I kept silence? No. All that knew Job knew him to be a man of undaunted resolution and a good cause, that boldly appeared and spoke and acted in defense of a pure and moral life of justice. And he didn't fear the face of man, nor was ever threatened, or browbeaten out of his duty. Now 35 says, oh, that I had one to hear me. Here is my mark. Oh, that the Almighty would answer me, that my prosecutor had written a book. Surely I would carry it on my shoulder and bind it on me like a crown. I would declare to him the number of my steps like a prince. I would approach him. So as Job begins to close his list of protests, he appeals to the judgment seat of God concerning the truth of everything he has said. And this was what he desired and often complained, that he could not obtain. And now that he had drawn up his own defense so particularly, he leaves it upon record in expectation of a hearing, files it, as it were, till his cause be called. So, any person with an upright heart does not dread scrutiny. He that is forthright and honest wishes he had a window in his chest that all people could see the intents of his heart. But an upright heart does particularly desire to be determined in everything by the judgment of God, which were sure and according to the truth. It was holy David's prayer, search me, O God, and know my heart. And it was the Apostle Paul's comfort, he that judges me is the Lord. So in his mind, Job, pictures the court scene. The prosecutors called the plaintiff, summoned and ordered to bring in his information, and to say that he has to, say against the prisoner, for he stands upon his deliverance. Job would be very glad to see the prosecutor's file and to have a copy of his indictment. And he would not hide it under his arm, but take it upon his shoulder to be seen and read of all men. In fact, he says he would bind it as a crown to him, that is, he would be pleased with it and look upon it as his ornament. Now, if the prosecutor's report has actually revealed any sin he had been guilty of, which he was not aware of, he would receive it well so that he might repent of it and get pardoned. You know, a righteous person is willing to know the worst about him or herself and is thankful to those that will report their faults. And verse 37, I will declare to him the number of my steps, is very interesting to me. If you have ever gone to court, your lawyer tells you to just keep your answers short and to the point. This way, the opposing attorney will not have anything new to go, after you with. So here we see that Job says that his life is an open book and that he has nothing to hide. So he will give the prosecutor any answer sought out. So confident is he of his integrity that he set himself up in his beliefs as a prince to be crowned rather than a prisoner to be tied. So in verse 38 it says, if my land cries out against me, and its furrows weep together. 39. If I have eaten its fruit without money or caused its owners to lose their lives, then let thistles grow instead of wheat and weeds instead of barley. The words of Job are ended. So Job remembers one more charge by these visitors from the charge of oppression and violence. And in doing wrong to his poor neighbors, Job states that the estate he both were obtained and used honestly, so that his land would not cry out against him. For one thing, Job comments that he never ate the fruits of it without money. Like Abraham, whatever he purchased, he paid for. The laborers that he employed had their wages duly paid them, and if he made use of the fruits of those lands that he let out, he paid his tenants for them. He never caused the owners to lose their life, and he never got an estate as Ahab got Naboth's vineyard by killing the heir and seizing the inheritance. He never starved those that held lands of him, nor killed them with hard bargains, hard usage. No tenant, no workman, no servant he had could complain of him. When men get estates unjustly, they are justly deprived of the comfort of them and disappointed in their expectations from them. As indicated in the Bible, they sow wheat, but it comes up thistles. So in closing, we need to take to heart that what men do not come honestly by will never do them any good. Yep. So there you go. I got through that one pretty quick today. It was 32 minutes. 32 minutes. Ooh-wee. This day has gone by so fast. Uh, all right. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here. And I'll pick back up tomorrow. Let me see where I'm going to go tomorrow. Just 1 second. I'm going to get my notes real quick. Yeah, I think I skipped around a little bit. I think tomorrow we may go backwards and talk about Job 15, 1 through 16. Probably Job 33, 1 through 33. Yeah, I've been skipping around a little bit here and there. Yeah, I'll probably do Job 33, 1 through 33 tomorrow. God bless you too, sweetie. Yeah, it went by fast, didn't it? Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, God willing, we're still around. I'll see you tomorrow.